So, in Jewish tradition, you've got these two massive pillars, the written Torah, which was given to Moses, and the oral Torah, which was supposedly given at the exact same time. But what happens if they don't just disagree, but completely contradict each other? Well, today we're digging into a source that argues they do, and the evidence it lays out is, well, it's pretty striking.
And right off the bat, the source material hits us with a bombshell of a fact. That phrase, oral Torah, it shows up exactly 0 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. Not once. So you've got to ask, right? If this oral Torah is so fundamentally important, why is the written Torah completely silent about it?
This tradition, the one that's never mentioned, is absolutely central to Rabbinic Judaism. So let's get on the same page. What exactly is the oral Torah supposed to be?
Okay, so the story goes like this. The revelation at Mount Sinai wasn't just one thing. It was 2. Moses got the written law, the first 5 books of the Bible. But he also got this massive oral law. This second part was basically all the explanations, all the fine print, passed down from teacher to student for hundreds of years before anyone ever wrote it down in books like the Talmud.
So, if we're supposed to believe that both of these traditions, the written one and the oral one, came from the same single divine source, our source material proposes a pretty simple test.
The whole premise is incredibly simple, right? If a single, perfect divine source gave both the written and oral Torahs, then they have to be in perfect harmony. They can't contradict each other. Period. So, with that test in mind, let's look at the evidence our source brings to the table. First up, the source points to contradictions in the most basic stuff, the stories, the narratives, and even whether some of the key characters were real people at all.
Our first example is a guy everyone's heard of, famous for his incredible suffering and faith, Job. And the question is simple, was he a real historical person or not? And right away, you see a major problem. In the written Torah, the prophet Ezekiel lists Job right next to guys like Noah and Daniel who were treated as historical figures. But then you look at the Talmud, a core text of the oral Torah, and it makes this stunning claim. Job never was and never existed. One source says he's history, the other says he's a myth.
Okay, how about another one? Let's go to that pivotal moment in Genesis. The mysterious all-night wrestling match with the patriarch Jacob. The big question, who exactly was he wrestling with?
The written Torah seems pretty clear. Jacob himself says he has seen God face to face, and another prophet, Hosea, calls the being an angel. But then you get to the oral tradition, and the identity gets a major rewrite. Now his opponent is Samael, the guardian angel of Jacob's arch-rival, Esau, and a figure often linked with Satan. Whoa. That's a huge change. We go from wrestling with God to wrestling with a demon.
But it's not just the stories, right? Our source argues this stuff leaks into the actual laws, the rules that have very real consequences for how people are supposed to live.
Let's take divorce. Super important, right? So what does it take for a man to divorce his wife? What are the legitimate grounds? In the written Torah, divorce is allowed for some indecency, which most people take to mean something serious, like adultery. But then you look at the Mishnah, and the bar gets lowered a lot. Burnt dinner? See someone prettier? Apparently that's good enough. The written law is talking about serious moral failure, and the oral law is talking about a bad meal. You see the disconnect?
And this leads to an even bigger, more fundamental question about the law itself. Is the written Torah this fixed, unchangeable text, or can you just change the rules?
And here's maybe the biggest clash of all. The written Torah puts up a giant do not touch sign. It says you can't add to it, you can't take away from it. But then you have a legendary commentator from the oral tradition saying, actually, the sages can decrease something that literally uproots a matter from the Torah. You just can't have both. One says it's unchangeable, the other claims the authority to change it. And it doesn't stop there. The source then turns its attention to some of the biggest names in the Bible, arguing that their moral character gets completely reevaluated, and in some cases, totally flipped on its head.
Let's talk about King David. The whole Bathsheba thing, it's one of the most famous stories of sin and repentance in the entire Bible. The biblical text is crystal clear about what happened, right?
Well, check this out. It's a total 180. The written Torah has David's own confession, clear as day, I have sinned. But the oral tradition comes along and says, anyone who says David sinned is mistaken. It's basically telling David, nope, you're wrong about yourself, you didn't actually sin. That's a pretty bold move to correct a guy's own confession.
And this isn't just a one-off thing. Let's look at the sons of the great prophet Samuel. They were appointed as judges, big-time leaders.
And here we go again, it's the exact same playbook. The written Torah gives this damning report card. They were corrupt, they took bribes, they twisted justice. And the oral tradition? Anyone who says the sons of Samuel sinned is mistaken. An explicit condemnation in the Bible gets completely whitewashed.
Okay, so after seeing all these examples, from stories to laws to the lives of famous figures, we have to come back to the main question our sources posing. Are these just creative interpretations? Are they flat-out contradictions?
So let's just recap what our source is pointing out here. We've got clashes on whether people were even real, who was who in major events, the most basic laws of society, and even the moral character of legendary leaders. This isn't just about small details.
And this all brings us to the final and pretty tough question this analysis forces us to ask. Now, supporters of the Oral Torah will argue this is all just deeper interpretation, unpacking a dense text for new times. But the source we've examined today really pushes back on that. It forces you to consider at what point does interpretation stop being interpretation and just become a flat-out human contradiction.